Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." Think about that. How many toxic patterns have directed your life while you blamed yourself, or worse, accepted them as just the way things are? This video will reveal 7 subtle yet destructive behaviors that Jung believed we should never allow in our lives. If you've ever felt trapped but couldn't figure out why, this is the clarity you've been waiting for. Most people imagine toxic behaviors as loud, obvious, or dramatic, but the most damaging chains are the ones you don't even see. Covert emotional manipulation is a silent enemy. It doesn't announce itself with shouting or threats. It slips quietly into your daily life, wearing the mask of care, concern, or even affection. It's the friend or parent who says, "I just want what's best for you," or, "If you really cared, you'd do this." On the surface, it looks supportive. Underneath, it's a subtle way of controlling your decisions and rewriting your reality. Jung called it a silent war that arrives disguised as care. These manipulative behaviors are so normalized by society, by expectations to endure, to stay quiet, to always be accommodating, that they become invisible. You're taught to see them as love or duty, not as control. That's what makes them so effective. They don't feel like attacks, they feel like guidance. But every time you're told, "for your own good," and you silence your instincts, a small part of your self-trust erodes. The manipulator's approval starts to matter more than your own judgment. Let's look at how this plays out. Imagine you've made a choice that feels right to you. Then someone close steps in, not with open criticism, but with concern. They highlight risks, question your thinking, and gently suggest you reconsider. Maybe it's a parent who reminds you of every possible thing that could go wrong, always in the name of love. At first, it seems like they're just looking out for you. But over time, you notice you're hesitating before making decisions, waiting for their approval, second-guessing your instincts. You start asking yourself, "Am I being ungrateful?" Or, "Is it selfish to want something different?" The more you lean on their validation, the less you trust your own voice. This is how covert manipulation takes root. It's not about dramatic ultimatums, it's about tiny, repeated moments where your confidence is chipped away. You're left in a constant state of self-doubt, unsure of where their influence ends and your own beliefs begin. Victims of this dynamic often describe a fog settling over their lives. You can't remember exactly when you started doubting yourself, but you feel the effects: hesitation, anxiety, a reluctance to speak up or assert your needs. The manipulator may not even realize the extent of their control, but the impact is real and lasting. Jung understood that these patterns are dangerous precisely because they don't look dangerous. They slip under your radar. Most people don't recognize them until the damage is done. The hardest part is that manipulation like this often feels like love. It's concern that suffocates, advice that disorients, kindness that quietly demands obedience. You're left wondering if you're the problem for not appreciating their help or for wanting something different. That's the trap. You start to believe the only way to keep the peace is to surrender your own needs. Awareness is the first line of defense. The moment you name this behavior, covert emotional manipulation, you begin to see it for what it is. Suddenly, you notice the patterns, the guilt trips, the passive-aggressive comments, the subtle pressure to conform. You realize that support shouldn't leave you feeling smaller or unsure. When you start to recognize these tactics, you create the first crack in the wall of dependency. Naming the behavior weakens its power. It's not just a vague discomfort anymore, it's a pattern you can observe, question, and resist. But let's be honest, recognizing manipulation doesn't make it disappear overnight. The first reaction is often guilt or self-doubt. You might wonder if you're overreacting, being too harsh or too sensitive. That's because manipulation conditions you to measure your worth by someone else's approval. Pushing back feels unfamiliar, maybe even selfish. But this discomfort is a sign you're moving in the right direction. Jung said, "Knowing your darkness is the best method for dealing with the darkness of other people." The willingness to see these patterns clearly, even when it's painful, is the beginning of freedom. There's another layer to this chain, and it's even more subtle. Sometimes the manipulator isn't another person, it's you. Over years of conditioning, you might start repeating these patterns in your own mind. You silence your instincts, dismiss your feelings, and convince yourself to go along for the sake of peace. These internal voices are echoes of the same toxic dynamics. Later, we'll see how this chain often lives inside your own mind. So, what can you do right now? Start by observing. Notice when advice or concern makes you feel less capable, less certain, or more dependent. Pay attention to moments when your instincts push back, but you ignore them out of habit. Watch for the times when help comes with strings attached, or when you find yourself shrinking to keep someone else comfortable. These small signals are clues. The more you recognize them, the more you can reclaim your confidence and your boundaries. Remember, manipulation thrives on silence. It counts on you doubting your right to speak up. Every time you ignore that small voice saying, "This doesn't feel right," the chain tightens. But every time you validate your own feelings, every time you say, "This is what I think, this is what I need," you weaken its hold. It's not about confrontation for its own sake. It's about refusing to let someone else's agenda rewrite your reality. There's one more thing you need to know. Many people who manipulate this way have no idea they're doing it. That doesn't excuse the behavior, but it explains why boundaries matter so much. When you set clear limits, you protect yourself and force others to confront their own patterns. You're not responsible for changing them, but you are responsible for defending your own mental space. Healthy boundaries aren't just a defense. They're a signal that you value yourself enough to be honest about what you will and won't allow. The first invisible chain, covert emotional manipulation, relies on staying hidden. Once you see it, it loses much of its power. But not all harm is delivered through concern or advice. Sometimes it hides inside something as ordinary as laughter. The next chain is even harder to spot because it wears the mask of humor. Jung said your unconscious can't tell a joke from a threat, so some laughter is a blade. That's why humiliation disguised as humor is so insidious. On the surface, it's just a joke, but underneath, it's a calculated way to cut someone down, all while giving the attacker cover and forcing the target to play along. There's no easy way to protest without being labeled as bitter, uptight, or someone who can't take a joke. You're left suspended between swallowing the insult or risking social exile. Laughter is supposed to connect us, but when it's used to humiliate, it isolates. Think about the last time you were in a group, maybe at a family dinner, maybe among friends, and someone lobbed a comment meant to get a rise out of everyone at your expense. If only you worked as hard at your job as you do at scrolling your phone, you might actually accomplish something. The room bursts into laughter. For a split second, all eyes are on you, waiting to see how you'll react. The pressure is immediate. Laugh along and pretend it's fine, or show your discomfort and risk the ridicule doubling down. Forced laughter trains you to swallow shame, embedding a sense of inferiority that lingers long after the joke. The moment you play along, you're teaching yourself that your feelings don't matter as much as the group's comfort. This is a double bind. Either you accept the humiliation and keep your place in the group, or you protest and become the problem. Over time, these moments accumulate. You start to question if you're too sensitive, if you're imagining the sting, or if you should just toughen up and join in. Jung recognized this pattern as a form of symbolic violence. It's not about bruises or scars, it's about the slow erosion of your self-worth. The people who deliver these jokes are often the ones you trust most, which only magnifies the impact. When a parent, sibling, or close friend makes you their punchline, their words cut deeper. The laughter masks the harm, but your unconscious mind registers every slight, every jab. You begin to internalize the message. Maybe you really are lazy, or a failure, or not good enough. The repetition cements these ideas in your psyche. What starts as a single joke becomes a narrative you carry with you, shaping how you see yourself. It doesn't stop at external humiliation. Once you've absorbed enough of these messages, you start using humor against yourself. You make self-deprecating jokes before anyone else can. It feels like a defense, but it's really a surrender. Every time you laugh at your own expense, you reinforce the same script others have written for you. The more you do it, the more others join in, and soon your identity is built on a foundation of mockery. Society tells you that being able to laugh at yourself is a virtue. There's truth in that, but only up to a point. When self-deprecation becomes your default, it isn't humility, it's internalized shame. You're not building resilience. You're teaching yourself, and everyone else, that your dignity is negotiable. The line between genuine humor and disguised violence is thin, but you know when it's been crossed. You feel it in the pit of your stomach, in the way you replay those moments later, wondering if you're the only one who noticed the sting. Jung argued that the unconscious absorbs these repeated patterns, regardless of intention. The mind doesn't care if it was just a joke. The effect is the same. You become smaller, quieter, more hesitant to assert yourself. You start to expect ridicule, even in new situations. The world feels less safe, and you find yourself shrinking from opportunities just to avoid becoming the next punchline. The real danger is how normalized this behavior becomes. Families, workplaces, friend groups, they all have their rituals of teasing and mockery. The expectation is that you'll take it in stride, that you'll prove your belonging by laughing along. But belonging bought at the price of dignity is a hollow victory. You're not really accepted, you're tolerated, as long as you don't disrupt the dynamic. That's not connection, it's compliance. So, how do you respond? It starts with noticing. Pay attention to how you feel when the joke lands. Do you feel included, or do you feel exposed? Does the laughter make you feel closer to the group, or does it put you on the outside? Your reactions are signals. Ignoring them only deepens the wound. When you recognize that a joke is actually a cut, you have options. You don't have to confront aggressively or make a scene. Sometimes it's enough to simply say, "I know you didn't mean anything by it, but that didn't feel good." Other times, you can disengage, withdraw your laughter, change the subject, let the moment pass without feeding it. These are small acts, but they send a clear message. You're not volunteering to be the target. Setting boundaries doesn't mean you're humorless. It means you value your self-respect. It means you refuse to let someone else's fun come at the cost of your confidence. If you catch yourself making self-deprecating jokes, pause and ask where that script started. Was it really your idea, or was it handed to you by years of subtle mockery? Challenge those stories. You don't have to accept every label that's thrown at you, even if it's disguised as a punchline. Jung believed that healing begins with awareness. Once you see the pattern, you can start to break it. The next time someone aims a joke at your expense, remember, you're allowed to protect your dignity. You don't have to laugh just to keep the peace. That's humor used as violence. Next, we'll see how your memories themselves can be weaponized. Have you ever tried to recall a memory, something you know happened, only to have someone immediately dismiss it with, "That never happened"? You pause. You replay the moment in your mind, searching for proof, but the doubt seeps in. Did you get it wrong? Was it an exaggeration? Multiply that moment over weeks, months, or even years, and your trust in your own perceptions starts to dissolve. You're not just doubting your memory, you're doubting yourself. That's gaslighting, a form of covert emotional manipulation designed to make you question your reality so deeply that you start living in someone else's version of the truth. Carl Jung warned that the most dangerous harm is the kind that severs your connection with yourself. Gaslighting does exactly that. It's calculated, persistent, and methodical, dismissing your experiences, rewriting your memories, and eroding your trust in the one person you should always rely on, yourself. What makes it especially sinister is that it rarely appears cruel. Gaslighting often wears the mask of reason or concern. Someone tells you you're overreacting when you express anger or sadness, or you're too sensitive when you point out a problem. The underlying message is always the same. Your emotions can't be trusted, your perspective is flawed. Over time, this message leaves you spiraling, emotionally unsteady, and increasingly dependent on the person feeding you this confusion. Let's look at how this plays out. You confront someone about something they said or did that hurt you. Instead of acknowledging your feelings, they deny your words outright. You're imagining things, leaving you doubting your own mind. You try to stand your ground, recalling the details, but they double down. Suddenly, you're not just defending your feelings, you're defending the very foundation of your memory. If this pattern continues, your certainty starts to slip. Was your memory accurate? Did you misunderstand? Their version of events begins to feel more believable than your own. This is the core of gaslighting. It pulls the ground out from under you, leaving you scrambling for stability while they remain unshaken. The emotional cost of this is enormous. The exhaustion alone is enough to break your resolve. Gaslighting is effective because it wears you down until you stop questioning what's being said. Eventually, you adapt. You accept their reality because it feels easier than fighting a battle you're convinced you can't win. But the price is steep. The longer this goes on, the more you disconnect from your own truth. Jung called this internal betrayal, the moment you turn against your own mind. Without trust in your own intuition, you become vulnerable to manipulation at every turn. Gaslighting doesn't happen in a vacuum. It thrives in relationships built on trust, partners, friends, family, even bosses. These are the people whose opinions matter most to you, which is why their words cut so deeply. When a stranger questions your reality, you can brush it off. But when someone close to you does it, the impact is devastating. Suddenly, the person you lean on for support becomes the very source of your doubt. Their approval starts to feel like the only thing that can steady you. That's the trap. It's not just about distorting reality, but about making you dependent on them to make sense of it. Think about those familiar phrases. You're being dramatic. That's not a big deal. Nobody else would react the way you are. If you've heard these before, you know how quietly destructive they are. They sound rational, maybe even concerned, but their function is always the same. They take a genuine emotional reaction and reframe it as ridiculous or flawed. The message is subtle but clear. You can't trust the way you feel. Over time, this cycle deepens. You stop opening up because you expect to be dismissed. You analyze every reaction, wondering if you're blowing things out of proportion. You question if your emotions are ever valid. This is the lasting damage gaslighting leaves behind. A fog that settles inside you, blurring the line between your feelings and someone else's manipulation. The tragedy is that many people who live through gaslighting don't recognize it right away. It's not loud or dramatic. There's no single moment where the line is crossed. It slips in quietly, changing the way you see yourself in the world until you barely notice the shift. Gaslighting is common in abusive dynamics, but it doesn't always look extreme. Sometimes it's so subtle it passes as normal. That's part of the problem. These behaviors become normalized, making them even harder to spot. People live with it for years, never realizing the weight they carry isn't theirs. But here's the truth. Gaslighting only works in silence. Once you call it what it is, its power starts to unravel. There's clarity in naming the dynamic, in seeing the illusion for what it is. When you recognize that someone is systematically twisting your reality, you shift the balance. Their words lose their grip. Instead of asking, "Am I the problem?" you begin to wonder, "Why do they need me to think I am?" Awareness doesn't just expose the gaslighter, it gives you a way back to yourself. That internal betrayal Jung described starts to heal the moment you let yourself feel and perceive without apology. It begins with small acts. Noticing when your reality is being questioned, refusing to dismiss your own emotions just because someone else does. These moments of self-validation build up, rebuilding the foundation that years of manipulation may have eroded. It's important to understand that calling out gaslighting won't always change the other person. Many gaslighters become even more defensive when confronted, accusing you of being paranoid or unstable. That's why recognizing gaslighting is not about changing them. It's about reclaiming your own sanity and peace. Your strength comes from within, from knowing your reality is valid, no matter what anyone else says. So, how do you start? Begin by noticing that knot in your stomach when someone rewrites your memory. Name it, and you crack the illusion. The moment you trust your own instincts, you start to clear the fog. You don't need the gaslighter to validate your reality. You can say, "I know what happened, whether you agree or not." That's the first step toward breaking the cycle. But not all wounds come from twisting your reality. Sometimes the pain is in what isn't said at all. Next, we'll confront a more silent erasure, invalidating your emotions. Picture this. You finally open up about heartbreak, something raw, something that still aches. You hope for understanding, maybe just a little comfort. Instead, you hear, "People get over breakups all the time." The words are meant to be practical, but they land like a cold dismissal. You feel exposed, then foolish for even bringing it up. It's not just the absence of comfort that hurts. It's the sense that your pain is somehow trivial, unworthy of attention. This is emotional invalidation. It doesn't scream or threaten. It whispers, quietly teaching you that your feelings are inconvenient, excessive, or simply wrong. Emotional invalidation works slowly, but its effects are deep. One offhand comment won't shatter you, but repeated dismissal compounds over time. When you share your feelings and they're minimized, you're overreacting. It's not that big of a deal. Everyone feels that way. The message is clear. Your emotions don't matter. Or worse, you don't matter. You learn to second-guess yourself. You wonder if you're making a fuss over nothing, if maybe you really are too sensitive. Jung saw this as a dangerous pattern. He warned that when feelings are denied, they don't disappear. Instead, they're forced into the shadow, the unconscious part of yourself where denied emotions gather and grow. Think back to the last time you tried to express frustration, sadness, or fear, only to be met with indifference or a quick solution. Maybe you mentioned feeling overwhelmed at work and got, "Everyone has bad days." Maybe you told someone you were anxious and they replied, "You worry too much." It seems harmless on the surface, even well-meaning, but the result is the same. Your experience is erased. You're left with the sense that you should hide your feelings, that vulnerability is a mistake. Over time, this shapes how you relate to yourself. You internalize the invalidation. The next time an uncomfortable emotion surfaces, you suppress it before anyone else can. You tell yourself to toughen up, to stop being dramatic, to move on. The voice that once came from outside now lives in your own head. This is where the real damage happens. Jung described these suppressed feelings as psychic energy trapped in the shadow. They don't vanish. Instead, they fester and eventually resurface, often as anxiety that won't let you rest, or insomnia that keeps you up at night. You might not even recognize the connection at first. All you know is that you feel restless, numb, or inexplicably angry. These are the echoes of every emotion you were told not to feel. Emotional invalidation is so common that most people don't see it as harmful. Phrases like, "You're too sensitive," or "Why are you making such a big deal out of this?" are everywhere, in families, friendships, workplaces. They're brushed off as honesty or pragmatism. But if you look closer, you'll see the cost. Every time someone closes the door on your vulnerability, it becomes a little harder to open up next time. The trust in the relationship erodes. Eventually, you stop sharing your inner world, not because you have nothing to say, but because you know it won't be heard. Sometimes, the person invalidating your feelings doesn't mean harm. They might think they're helping, offering a reality check or trying to make you feel better by minimizing your pain. But intent doesn't erase the impact. The harm is real, whether it comes from carelessness or cruelty. That's why awareness matters. You have to notice when it's happening and recognize why it's so damaging. Only then can you begin to break the cycle. Let's make this concrete. Say you come home after a stressful day, looking for support. You tell a friend or partner how overwhelmed you feel. Instead of listening, they respond, "You think that's bad? My day was way worse." Your feelings are sidelined, replaced by theirs. It's subtle, but the message lands. Your emotions aren't important. Maybe you brush it off the first time, but the next time you're stressed, you keep it to yourself. Over time, you learn to stop reaching out. You keep your struggles private, convinced that your feelings are a burden. This is how emotional invalidation teaches you to mistrust your own experience. Jung warned that when you deny your emotions, you lose touch with your authentic self. The longer you suppress what you feel, the more disconnected you become, not just from pain, but from joy, excitement, and genuine connection. You go numb, not only to what hurts, but to everything that matters. So, what can you do? The first step is to recognize the invalidating messages you've absorbed. Listen for that internal voice that tells you to get over it or stop being so sensitive. Ask yourself whose voice that really is. Did it start with you, or did you learn it from someone else? Once you spot the pattern, you can start to challenge it. Practice self-validation. When you feel something, anger, sadness, even happiness, acknowledge it. You don't need to justify or minimize it. Simply say, "It's okay to feel this way." It will feel awkward at first, especially if you've spent years silencing yourself, but it's essential for rebuilding trust in your own emotions. When you encounter invalidation from others, you don't have to fight or explain yourself. Setting a boundary can be as simple as saying, "I need you to hear what I'm feeling, not just dismiss it." That's enough. You're not asking for permission to feel. You're stating a fact about your experience. If the other person can't or won't respect that, it tells you something important about the relationship. Recognizing emotional invalidation is difficult, especially when it's been part of your life for so long. But once you see it, you can't unsee it. Awareness is the first step to reclaiming your voice and honoring your feelings instead of brushing them aside. Jung taught that what remains unconscious controls us. By naming invalidation and refusing to let it define your emotional reality, you begin to bring those shadows into the light. Invalidation leaves you numb. Next, we'll explore the void of being erased entirely. There's a particular kind of pain that doesn't come from harsh words or open rejection. It comes from being met with nothing at all. You reach out, hoping for connection, and all you get is a wall of silence. Maybe you send a message that matters, ask a question that requires honesty, or simply look for reassurance. Instead of a response, you get absence. It's not a case of someone being busy or distracted. It's the deliberate withholding of acknowledgement, a cold, intentional silence. This is silent contempt. And its impact is sharper than most people realize because it leaves you alone with your thoughts, with no explanation and nowhere to put your pain. Silent contempt, sometimes called social erasure, works by removing you from the conversation without saying a word. It's not just that your words go unanswered, it's that your existence feels erased. You wonder if you did something wrong, if you're worth noticing, if you even matter to the person ignoring you. That's how shame creeps in. You start to believe the silence is evidence of your own irrelevance. The uncertainty eats at you because there's nothing to confront, nothing to fix, just a void that grows with every unanswered attempt at connection. This isn't abstract. If you've ever been ignored by someone you care about, you know how quickly that silence turns to self-doubt. You might replay every conversation, searching for a hidden offense. You question your worth, your instincts, and your place in the relationship. The silence doesn't just keep you out, it turns you against yourself. Unlike open conflict, where you at least know the boundaries, silent contempt leaves you suspended in uncertainty. It's a wound that can't heal because you can't even see where it begins or ends. Jung warned that isolation severs you from the part of yourself that seeks connection. When someone uses silence as a weapon, it doesn't just cut you off from them, it cuts you off from your own sense of self. Over time, the absence of acknowledgement becomes a reflection of your worth. If nobody responds, you start to believe you're not worth responding to. This is the psychic wound Jung described, the feeling that you're not just alone, but invisible. The silent treatment is one of the clearest forms of this behavior. One moment, you're part of the conversation. The next, you're shut out completely. No words, no eye contact, no recognition that you're even there. There's no explanation, no argument to resolve, just a growing wall of silence. The more you try to break through, the more impenetrable it feels. You end up questioning yourself, wondering if you're the problem, if you should have said less or acted differently. The lack of feedback means you can't even defend yourself because you don't know what you're defending against. What makes silent contempt so corrosive is that it offers no closure. There's no apology, no conversation, no reason to move on. You're left in a constant state of uncertainty, replaying events and blaming yourself for the silence. The emotional toll is heavy. You begin to internalize the rejection, believing it says something about your value as a person. The silence becomes a mirror, reflecting back every insecurity you've ever had. It's easier to blame yourself than to accept that someone you care about is choosing to erase you. The longer this goes on, the more isolated you feel, not just from others, but from your own emotions. You start to suppress your need for connection, telling yourself it's safer not to reach out at all. You learn to keep your feelings to yourself, to avoid the risk of being ignored again. Or you go the other way, working harder and harder for even a scrap of acknowledgement, measuring your worth by someone else's attention. Either path leads to the same place. You lose touch with who you are, constantly calibrating your actions to avoid the pain of being erased. Jung saw this as a form of psychic death. a slow, subtle loss of vitality that comes from being cut off from real connection. The absence of validation doesn't just make you lonely, it makes you question your right to exist as you are. That's why silent contempt is so damaging. It doesn't just hurt in the moment, it teaches you to doubt your own reality, to shrink yourself so you won't be ignored again. Over time, this erodes your confidence, your voice, and your sense of belonging. The scars left by silent contempt can last for years. People who have been erased in this way often develop patterns of avoidance or people-pleasing. You might find yourself staying silent to avoid conflict, or you might go to great lengths to make sure you're never ignored again. The need for acknowledgement becomes desperate, and the fear of silence shapes every interaction. You end up depending on others to tell you who you are and whether you matter. Breaking free from this dynamic isn't easy, but it starts with recognition. You have to name the behavior. This is silent contempt. It's not a misunderstanding or a minor slight. It's a form of emotional abuse designed to control and diminish. Once you call it what it is, you can begin to see it as a reflection of the other person's limitations, not your own worth. Their silence is about their inability to engage, not your lack of value. From there, you can start to reclaim your sense of self. Instead of chasing acknowledgement from someone who refuses to give it, turn inward. Remind yourself, I deserve to be heard. The instinct to fill the silence is strong, but you don't have to keep proving your worth to someone who refuses to see you. Setting boundaries is essential. Communicate clearly. If you're upset, I need us to discuss it openly. This silence isn't productive. Whether or not they change, you're making it clear that your needs matter. Jung believed healing begins with awareness. By naming silent contempt and refusing to internalize its message, you take the first step toward breaking its hold. You're not responsible for changing someone else's behavior, but you are responsible for how you let it define you. The shift won't happen overnight, but even small acts of self-respect begin to fill the space that silence once occupied. Your worth isn't measured by someone else's response. You matter, even when you feel unheard. We've faced manipulation, mockery, lies, dismissal, and erasure. Soon, we'll see how praise and sacrifice can be just as toxic.